Welcome to Fertility Help Hub's podcast. I'm Eloise, the founder and editor, and each week we bring you expert interviews, reader stories, holistic products, and more. Subscribe to our podcast for free so you never miss an episode. Today I'm welcoming my guest, who is Toby Trice Racing, who is a racing ambassador for male infertility. Welcome, Toby.
Hello, Eloise. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm great, thank you. I'm having an awesome week, which is great.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm really delighted to be speaking to you today because I have read so much about you and I think what you're doing is amazing and I can't wait to share it with everyone listening.
Thank
you.
So
could we start by you telling a bit about your personal trying to conceive journey and male infertility factors and causes and symptoms that you have experienced personally to date?
Yeah, so I've been trying to conceive now for almost 6 years. It's been quite a long journey and a rocky one, like many of the listeners out there obviously are going through the same sort of situation. We spent the first year kind of trying naturally, just kind of, just assume we'd be able to have a child. We settled down, had a house, good jobs and stuff and, ready for a family. And we took that decision. A year later, unfortunately, we didn't have any success or any sniff of pregnancy. So we kind of just knew that there was something going on and perhaps we need to further investigate it, is when we saw our GP. Throughout that following 3 years, we was on the kind of merry-go-round of the NHS funded system of going through various tests, which for me, I had some very early tests and the results came back pretty okay. For my partner, typically with the sort of female fertility, there's a lot more tests that they have done because they just assume that it's usually the woman that's kind of causing the problems. So yeah, for the first 3 years, we did kind of Clomid, testing, experimental stuff. Again, no success at the end of it. And then we were finally referred to IVF, to a private clinic, NHS funded, to actually now try and have IVF. And at that point, I was still quite in denial that we were actually on this journey. I just thought, you know what, it'll happen. Like, it'll be fine. I'm just trying to be supportive and protective of my partner because she was dealing with such an emotional time for herself. And she found it very difficult at the early beginning. So, we had 2 cycles of ICSI treatment, and we had at the beginning very good success. We had a very good fertilization rate. Our embryos kind of grew perfectly for the first sort of 3 to 4 days, and we were very, very hopeful on the first cycle that we had 7 embryos that were growing lovely. We were going to be parents. We had, that was it. We were very, very sure that this was going to work. So come day 5, most of our embryos had just collapsed. And we did have a blastocyst that was transferred, but it was the only one out of the 7 that actually was ready to go. And of course, at that point, we were kind of like feeling a little bit less confident because it was such a good start. But obviously we didn't, we only had the one to transfer and we had none to freeze. So it was kind of all in and just hope that this would work. And unfortunately, before the 2-week wait was up, before we actually tested for pregnancy, sadly we didn't conceive, and unfortunately it wasn't to be. So we went on to a second cycle, very much identical. And it was just a bit of a shame, really. We kind of got to the end of it, and the kind of embryologist just explained that based on how the kind of embryos are growing, it was suggested there was kind of like a DNA issue. And based on their research, they just suggested that it was more the male counterpart, which was myself, which was heartbreaking news. I kind of just fell into this almost immediate depression of just feeling so low, and kind of, I think because I was kind of being protective of my partner and not dealing with my emotions, at that point, everything kind of came crashing down on me. Yeah, we just took a year out just to kind of just find ourselves again, because we just got lost in this kind of fertility merry-go-round, and lost ourselves. And we just needed to kind of spend some time together and just kind of regroup and get ourselves healthy again, because we were both pretty depressed and down. And then now we're kind of, we took a year out, we're back on this journey now. COVID's kind of put things a little bit to a stop at the beginning of the year. But I've just recently seen a urologist, Jonathan Ramsey in London, to look at kind of what's going on. And it turns out that I've got a high level of DNA fragmentation, which he believes is caused by a varicocele, which is treatable. So based on his research and his very, very long career as a urologist and his expertise, he suggests that having an embolization, I believe is what the operation's called, to almost fix the varicocele, so kind of reduce blood flow, thus reduce temperature in the testes, and then hopefully that will then reduce the DNA fragmentation. That is if it's like post-production problem, which he's very confident it will be. So we're very, very hopeful. There's every chance after this that we could potentially fall naturally pregnant, which would be an absolute dream come true. But if not, we're planning to have further ICSI rounds, subject to obviously the results coming back that the procedure has worked. So that's where we're at now, Eloise. It's been a really rough ride. It's still very emotional for us to kind of be kind of on that journey, but we're feeling very much positive now that we've kind of at least explored absolutely everything that we can in order to give us the best possible chance of success.
Wow, Toby, I can't believe what you've been through in the past 6 years. It's just unthinkable. But I'm glad that you now have some answers, because I guess, as you said, that now puts you into a mindset of, we've got something to try now. But in terms of the NHS rounds that didn't work, do you feel disappointed that this DNA fragmentation of your sperm wasn't found before you went through those rounds?
Yeah, massively, because what we kind of felt with the kind of the process of NHS, and it was so grateful for all of the help and all the consultants that have worked with us, incredibly grateful. But what we find frustrating is that when I had my early semen analysis and everything kind of came back relatively good, there was a bit of a morphology issue, but they said that wouldn't be too much of a problem for us to worry about. I was just then pushed aside, and emotionally and kind of obviously physically, nothing else was done. I was kind of just left to it, and the focus was on my partner. But if we had as intensive test done on myself as it was for my partner, and we both had thorough investigations prior to any rounds of IVF or any further treatment, at least we would have known. And that would have been like 4 years ago now, that we potentially could have found out this situation, potentially could have got it rectified sooner. It would have saved all of the heartache and the problems that we've had around going through ICSI, because it's such a stressful thing to go through. And potentially we could have a child now. And I find it incredibly frustrating. I think just because there's not that much education out there, or for me at the time there wasn't, our situation could be so different.
It's hard, isn't it? Because you follow a process and you just go from one step to the next, don't you? And I guess hindsight's a good thing, but I'm so glad that you've got something to focus on now, and wishing you all the best for that part of your journey.
Thank you.
In terms of the effects on your relationship, how has that been? I know you mentioned that you struggled and took a year out. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, going through fertility treatment and having this kind of struggle of trying to conceive, I think it's very, very tested on a relationship. It certainly tested us, but in more of a positive way than I imagined. It kind of brought us closer together, which was great. But because we were kind of just thrown through the process of all this kind of appointments, seeing people, getting results, hoping, and kind of having the ups and downs, and it's a huge merry-go-round of emotions when you go for fertility treatment. We just completely lost ourselves. We no longer was doing things that we enjoyed as a couple. Things like just eating out and going to have a drink somewhere, and a holiday, and just things that were just kind of spending time together for the reasons that you love each other, versus spending time together for the sake of just going through fertility treatment. And I think that was very difficult for us both. Fortunately though, we became closer through it, and having the year out away from fertility treatment was just incredible, because we were like, oh my God, it's just so nice to have us back, and seeing smiles on my partner's face, and just doing things that we both enjoyed and loved. So I think it's important to be mindful of that the whole way through fertility treatment. We certainly wasn't, and I think that if you are more mindful around it, it's definitely more positive, and at least it allows you to kind of just breathe a little bit.
Absolutely. I think that's top advice. Thank you. One thing I forgot to ask you, which I will just ask you now, if that's okay. In terms of male infertility factors and DNA fragmentation, were there any causes or reasons why, or symptoms?
In the early doors, no. Just had normal semen analysis, and that came back pretty normal. Slightly sub-average, but that's not massively a reason to cause concern. But I did have some discomfort about 3 years ago, and we had a ultrasound just to see if I have got a varicocele, and there was one there. It's very, very common in men. And it was just seen as just like, okay, it's just there. There's no need to worry. And that was kind of it, really. So at the time, there was no concern up until only recently.
And you're doing amazing things for the fertility world and male infertility support. So could you tell our listeners a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So, wow, where do I start, really? So when I kind of had this sort of depression and just feeling down and low, and just kind of where I was at, and it was very, very difficult, I kind of then started looking into male support and who I can go and turn to and talk to. And it was when I stumbled across Fertility Network UK, and across the internet, there was kind of very little help out there for guys. But the charity was incredibly supportive, and I made use of some counselling and some things to kind of get me back on my feet and just kind of help me out. And it was very, very helpful. But the more I kind of dug deeper into this, the more I realised that there was just very, very little help out there for guys. My kind of escape at the time was go-karting at my local track. It was a place that I could just go and literally just have a race, let off some steam, let off some energy, and just let it out in the car. And that was kind of my release almost. I think guys need that. I think we all need that, to be fair. And across the few months of going into 2018 into 2019, when I was having this really bad time and trying to turn my life around and make things a bit more positive into 2019, while we found ourselves again, I became a racing driver. I used my negative energy of fertility to get good at another sport and become a racing driver. And it was at that time that I spoke to the charity and just explained that what I was up to in motorsport. And I had this idea where I wanted to try and help support men, but also break down the barriers of male fertility so that people can be more open, aware of male fertility, and the fact that by kind of being a role model within motorsport, I could use that to break down the barriers among men to actually talk about fertility. Because I realized that once I started talking more openly about my situation and sharing it with counselling, friends and family and other people, it was much, much easier for me to deal with. So I became the male ambassador for Fertility Network UK, and have since set up a online male fertility support group alongside Ian Stones for the charity. And we have over 20 odd guys a month come along. And I still use motorsport as kind of my story, if you like, to kind of spread this awareness. And now I'm doing this support group. It's just so fulfilling. I'm just so glad that we're able to offer something for guys to come along and have a chat and just talk it through.
That's so inspiring. And as you know, my husband is infertile, and this is exactly the kind of thing that he couldn't find 5 years ago. Yeah. So I think what you're doing is incredible, and all the links to this are included in the write-up to this podcast. So please feel free to reach out to Toby. And you recently also wrote a little bit for us in an article we did around the documentary Me, My Balls and I. What were your thoughts on that documentary?
Do you know what? I think it was great. I think that, Christopher's done something really good there, because obviously he's very influential among younger guys. And I think educational among younger guys is actually quite important right now, because myself in a situation 5 years ago, I just assumed that I'd be able to have a child, and that everything would be okay. I never needed to check myself for anything. I kind of just was like, I'm fit and healthy and young, and when we decide to have children, it would just be fine. And I think what he's doing is actually quite clever, because it's kind of making more people aware that guys can have issues that can prevent them from having children, but also bringing that among the younger crowd as well, because guys that are now coming through maybe their teens through to their early 20s that maybe not even thought about having children are going to be a bit more aware that actually they might struggle themselves, and just having yourself checked out is very, very important. Because you just don't know. 10 years ago, I would never have known I was in this situation. So I think what Christopher Hughes has done is fantastic. And I'm just so glad that more and more people are kind of getting on board with this male fertility awareness. And let's hope we can make it even more special and bigger.
Absolutely. In fact, my husband's diagnosis, the microtesi operation that he had, was not successful, age 30 or 31. It may have been successful had he had it earlier in his life, but he wasn't thinking about fertility when he was 20, as
No.
he said. And there was no education around the fact that there are these things that can go wrong, or that genetic issues that can occur. So you're absolutely right that this awareness is key.
Definitely, because I think when we're younger, certainly coming through the kind of UK educational system, it's very much a case of like don't fall pregnant. This is contraception. Like, this is how you prevent having children. It's very like kind of anti having a family, which when you're younger, it's not necessarily a sensible thing to have if you're not financially stable, etc., for a family. But education around what if you can't, conceive naturally is equally as important. And I think that anything we can do around kind of educating kind of younger people of these things that could happen later on in life, then it could change people's outcomes. And like you say with your husband, it could have changed the outcome maybe.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But the person has to be ready, don't they, for
sure,
for the diagnosis, if there is going to be one. But absolutely, I totally agree. And in terms of your next steps, you've talked through regarding the treatment that you're about to be having. If that sadly isn't successful, what are your thoughts about other options?
So if it's not successful, we're going to try another round of ICSI and see if that's a success. But obviously, if that's not successful, we've spent a lot of time in counselling talking about alternative options such as donors and adoption. That's a whole complicated process in its own right, and I think based on kind of the couple's personal decisions, it's right or wrong for each couple, and every person's different. But we've obviously talked about it. It's come up in conversation quite a lot, and obviously we have a lot of counselling around it, and it just isn't for us. We both came to the same conclusion for donor and adoption separately, that it just wouldn't be suitable for us. But that doesn't mean to say it's not an option that people should consider, because I think it's fantastic that people do. It's just got to be obviously a sort of preferred choice for the couple, really.
Definitely. It's totally personal decision, isn't it?
Definitely.
And actually, it's probably a good thing that you both did come to the same conclusion naturally, because if one of you wanted to go down one route and the other another, it might be a difficult conversation to have.
Yeah, definitely, because it is a big choice. It's a big decision to make, to go through donor or adoption, because like having your own child, it's almost like a completely separate thing, isn't it, when you go through that process. And I think just like having a child, your own child naturally is a decision among a couple to conceive a child and be happy that they're going to be a father and mother. I think it's exactly the same thought process when it comes to sort of donor or adoption. You've both got to be on the same page for it to work. It needs to be positive to bring that child into the world, and both parties need to be happy that that's good for both of them, right?
Totally. And whilst we've still got you, takeaway message for men out there who are struggling.
Wow. Takeaway message for me really is just is reach out if you're feeling take time to sort of be aware of your emotions. I certainly wasn't. I kind of blocked them out. But being aware of your emotions is really, really important, and reaching out for support and advice is even more important than that. I'm always on the other end of the phone. People can reach me via email, Instagram, Twitter, all the social handles. But if you want anyone to come and chat to, give us a shout. I'm always here.
Thank you, Toby. And one thing we spoke about before we came on the podcast was something that my husband felt. And I think that you said you may have had these feelings at times of feeling inadequate and like you can't do the job that you wanted to do, if that makes sense. For men who have to come to terms with the fact that they are the cause. It's so important to go and get that support, isn't it?
Yeah, even more so. I completely crushed and broke down when I realised that it was likely to be me that was the issue why we couldn't have children. It's such a complex set of emotions that arise, because as a guy, you're kind of there looking after your partner and you're trying to be macho. You're trying to be a good husband for your partner, right? And the minute you get told that you can't then allow your partner to be a mother because of whatever reason is absolutely heartbreaking. So reaching out for support and just talking it through with professional help and or people in the community is so important.
Great. Thank you so much, Toby. And for anyone out there, please feel free to contact him.
Thank you for having me, Eloise. It's been lovely to be on the show.